so much, Brad. It's great to be here. It's great to be introduced by Brad, because you should never forget that Brad, as well as everything else he is a Shakespeare scholar. And I was thinking about that as I was following the conference on Twitter from the East Coast until late last night when I arrived. And I thought the same way that Shakespeare operated within the formal constraints of the sonnet. Today we are all operating within the formal constraints of 140 characters on Twitter. And following the conference on Twitter was absolutely fascinating. Especially what Guy said about moving from engagement to enchantment. I totally love that, especially because it fits perfectly as a segue to what I want to talk about today. It's really my absolute belief that we are moving towards a world where increasingly we want to tap into what we call our humanity, the noblest parts of ourselves. And when you look at what is happening, you may think that I'm absolutely making stuff up because there is so much going on that is completely dysfunctional. But in fact, it's almost like watching a split screen. And depending on which part of the screen you're focusing on, you get a very different impression of what is going on in the world. You can focus on one part of the screen, which is all the dysfunctionality going on in Washington, the impossibility of coming up with anything but suboptimal solutions to all our problems. Or you can focus on what is being born, which is really about connecting at a deeper level than ever before. And we see that in cause marketing. I was recently in a hotel room late at night watching TV, and yes, I still do that occasionally. And there was this ad which started with a piano music and a very low male voice that said, millions of people live only for themselves. But is that really the only way? And it went on like that, showing people doing noble things, and it ended up with, guess what? An ad for Shiva's whiskey. So I thought to myself, if Shiva's whiskey is using nobility and doing something for others as a way to sell Shiva's whiskey, then clearly, given that marketing and advertising are always leading indicators of what's happening in the culture, there's something going on, and we'd better identify it and tap into it very quickly. And of course, you see this trend towards cause marketing way beyond Shiva's whiskey. You see it in, for example, what B. Stone said when he defined Twitter not as the triumph of technology, but as the triumph of humanity. And recently I was on a panel with Adam Bain, who's been brought in to monetize Twitter. And he said that the three keys to monetization are humor, huge deals, and humanity. And humanity is the key, because if we're actually moving towards an era when humanity is not just good for humanity, but good for the bottom line, something pretty dramatic is happening. And in fact, we see that everywhere. We see it in companies like Western Union that recently had a campaign that included a lot of social media to encourage people to tell them where the next Grameen bank that produces and gives macrofinancing should be set up. And it was a very successful campaign. Of course, Starbucks constantly does that. Pepsi, Coca-Cola, I don't want to single out brands that may be advertising on air. I'll Huffington Post soon, but you get the idea. Especially since Jeff Levick, the head of our advertising, who's driving cause marketing for us, and Tim Richards, who runs the West Coast, are in the hall. I wouldn't hear the end of it. But my point is that there is something very profound happening. And whenever, as marketers, as media providers, as advertisers, we can tap into the zeitgeist, we have the wind on our back. Now, zeitgeist is an incredibly heavy German word that is untranslatable in English and even in Greek. But it does exist, and it's really about the spirit of the times. And I remember meeting Jonas Salk while I was writing a biography of Picasso in an earlier life. And just before he died, he said to me, we are moving from Epoch A to Epoch B. And Epoch A, he defined as being about survival and competition, and Epoch B as being about collaboration and meaning. So if we tap into this large trend that's happening, and in a way Guy is tapping into that with his book on enchantment, then we're tapping into something very profound. And it doesn't just affect our business, it affects our lives. Now, moving on to the second point, beyond cause marketing and humanity. There is something very connected to that, which is about the fact that we are moving more and more towards local. Just as we are hyper-connected on the global level, people are gravitating towards the local level. Because it's not just all politics that is local, or human existence is ultimately local. And as things at the national level are increasingly dysfunctional, as I mentioned earlier, people can come to the local level and feel empowered. They can actually get things done. And I see that with Patch. Patch.com is the hyperlocal initiative that I'm now overseeing at AOL. And it's absolutely fascinating. We are in over 800 towns. And it actually brings to life what Craig Newmark said, the founder of Craigslist. He said, trust is the new black. And ultimately, people trust what's happening around them in their own neighborhood and connect at that level. Especially when the media that we are so used to at the national and global level is so increasingly disconnected from our lives. I don't know how many of you remember, for example, Balloon Boy. It was like endless breaking news coverage on all cable and network news even. And it turned out, first of all, that the Balloon Boy was really the attic boy. He was never in the balloon. But beyond that, I remember about to go on a television show to talk about Afghanistan, and the anchor said to me, but let's talk about Balloon Boy first. And I said, why? And the point is that the media has this false sense of sentimentality. Suddenly you had all these anchors emoting over whether the Balloon Boy was cold in the balloon because the wind was blowing. And I thought to myself, there are hundreds of thousands of little boys in this country who are going to bed hungry, who are going to dysfunctional schools, who could use a little bit of emotion and caring from a lot of anchors on our TV shows. And it gave me the idea of maybe creating like a giant balloon and putting some of these hundreds of thousands of little boys in. We wouldn't even have to put them in, actually. We could pretend we put them in order to get a little bit of that attention. So while people are increasingly getting that sense of disconnection from what is being covered by our media, they can go to the local level and connect with what is happening in their communities. That's what we are doing with Catch, and that's really what we see is catching fire. Because you don't just read about your community, you engage with it. And as Will.i.am, I always like to quote Will.i.am and Shakespeare in the same speech. As Will.i.am said, in the olden days, like 5 years ago, we used to consume news sitting on a couch. Today, we consume news galloping on a horse. We don't just consume it, we share it, we pass it on, we add to it, we tweet it. And therefore, doing that at the local level keeps you really connected with your immediate community. And focusing on solutions, that's the other thing that mainstream media have let us down on. There's been so much emphasis on what is not working and very little emphasis on what is working. At the Huffington Post, we launched a feature that we called the greatest person of the day. And it was a huge success. Every day we get thousands of submissions from around the country, around the world, and we put a spotlight on somebody who is doing good. Now at the Patch level, we're going to launch it as the greatest person of the week in every patch. And it's amazing how people gravitate to solutions when it comes to their own neighborhoods and to getting stuff done. So, as we're looking at that, of course, there is nothing new about wanting to fix the world and make the world better. I mean, it's an old tendency in human nature. But what's happening today is that the digital reality makes it possible for us to do it obsessively. The main distinction for me between mainstream media and online media, ultimately, as we are more converging towards, in our case, doing more and more original reporting, in the mainstream media's case, doing more and more stuff online. So the main difference is going to be that while mainstream media suffer from ADD, attention deficit disorder, they cover a story and then they abandon it, we suffer from OCD. We cover stories obsessively until there is an impact, until something happens. I mean, just look at our coverage of the foreclosure crisis. It's endless because the crisis has not ended. And we can cover it in smaller pieces and in shorter pieces and in a constant way that really engages the community. And we can do that with even more power at the local level and get everybody engaged in it and in the process occasionally enchanted. So, as we are moving into this epoch B that John Assault talked about, the third thing that I want to talk about is the fact that we are increasingly going to also need to disconnect from our hyper-connected existence. And now that may seem to you like something that doesn't make sense, because you are all hyper-connected. I don't know how many devices you have on you right now, and I hope you're not looking at them at all while I'm speaking. I remember the last time my mother got angry with me before she died. It was when I was looking at my email and talking to my daughters at the same time, and she looked at me and in her very, very heavy Greek accent. If you think I have a heavy Greek accent, you have not heard my mother. She said to me, "I abhor multitasking." And I think the truth is that we are all constantly multitasking, and in the process we are missing something. And we are all constantly hyper-connected, and in the process we are missing something. And that's why I think the next big trend that I would want us to bet on here, and those of you who are brilliant at inventing things and new apps and new devices, that's what I would urge you to invent next. And I give you my patent rights right now in front of everybody. And this is a kind of thing that I would call a GPS for the soul. An app, a device, whatever it can be, that actually shows us how aligned or misaligned we are in our bodies, our minds, and our souls at every moment, and also shows us what we can do to realign ourselves. And I will start with something very simple. I will start with an obsessive emphasis, as we are going to be doing increasingly in our coverage around these issues, on sleep. It may seem very small to you, very irrelevant. You say she's talking about something trivial like sleep, but in fact the medical evidence is overwhelming that it's essential for our health, for our creativity, for everything you can imagine. And we women will kind of lead the way in this, because you guys have kind of defined and equated sleep deprivation with virility. I don't know why, but I recently had a dinner with a guy who said to me and bragged about it, that, you know what, he said, I just had 4 hours sleep last night. And I thought to myself, I didn't say it, but I thought to myself, you know what, if you had had 5 hours sleep, this dinner would have been a lot more interesting. So the bottom line is that if we have an incredible plethora, we already have a lot of apps that can help you do a yoga class while you're at your desk, or at least in your office. We already have a lot of apps that have guided meditations or remind you to take some time off during the day. So these things already exist. But imagine if we created a killer app for optimal living. I know that as an editor, I encourage our reporters and our editors in this area of women, of living, of health, to keep focusing on all these ways that we can unplug and recharge, which is the way we call it. Because you know how we never would go to bed unless we're absolutely exhausted or drunk without plugging our devices in, at night, because we know otherwise they would be dead in the morning. But we don't pay the same attention to ourselves. And probably the most profound thing I'm going to say right now is that if there's anybody in this room who goes to sleep with their devices plugged next to their bed, please stop doing that. Because there's a lot of medical evidence, and a lot of people are looking at me very guiltily, so I know there are a lot of people doing that. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but don't do it anymore. Because there's a lot of evidence that if you wake up in the middle of the night, for whatever reason, and you are tempted to check your device, your sleep is not going to be the same after that. It's not going to be as profound, as recharging. And don't you want to wake up feeling recharged and ready to take the world and ready to enchant everyone? It's very hard to enchant people when you're sleep deprived. And if you think that this is not profound enough, let me quote Plotinus. Is Plotinus profound enough for you? He was a philosopher in the 3rd century, okay? Will.i.am, Shakespeare, and Plotinus, who studied the different sources of knowledge, wisdom, and creativity. And he said knowledge has 3 degrees: opinion, science, and illumination. And the internet actually has contributed much to the first 2 kinds of knowledge. Science in the form of easy access to endless data and information, right? We have no problem with that. And it has also contributed an enormous amount to the second kind of opinion. We have endless streams of opinion on every subject from every quarter, no problem with that. But it has not done a lot about illumination. Because illumination is ultimately about wisdom. And that's the most profound kind of knowledge. And that's what we're desperately missing at the moment. I mean, just look at the world around us. We are not lacking in IQ, right? There are hundreds of leaders running media companies, running our government, running our financial institutions with very high IQs, having graduated from the best colleges in this country. And they're making dreadful decisions every day. So what they're missing is not IQ or data or information or connectivity, they're missing wisdom. And sometimes I think to myself, you know what, if Lehman Brothers was Lehman Brothers and Sisters, they might still be around. I just thought to myself, maybe some sister would wake up after a good 8-hour sleep and look around and see the iceberg about to hit the Titanic. Isn't that what leadership is about? While everybody else had missed it. So leadership is about seeing the iceberg before it hits the Titanic. Leadership is about seeing what's around the corner, whether you are inventing something or whether you are avoiding a danger. And in order to get there, we need to actually learn to unplug, recharge, disconnect, and reconnect with ourselves. And that, I feel, is going to be one of the greatest strengths as I look ahead and look into my crystal ball, which I do regularly after a good night's sleep, and see what the future is holding for us. And interestingly enough, a lot of that is happening through humor. I mean, one of the reasons why Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert have really tapped into the zeitgeist is because they're acknowledging this longing in people to connect with each other at a deeper level. I don't know how many of you went to their Washington rally to restore sanity. In a moment of irrational exuberance, when I was on Jon Stewart's show just before the rally, I offered to take anybody who wanted to go there from New York, a ride from New York, right? I did not realize at the time that 10,000 people would sign up. So we ended up having 200 buses leaving from Citi Field at 5 a.m. for the rally. But when I was there at 5 a.m. welcoming people, sleep deprived, I realized something very profound, that these people were saying to me, I said, I flew from Minneapolis to take the bus. I flew from Denver to take the bus to go to Washington. And then I met somebody who said to me, I just flew from Washington to take the bus to go to And I thought to myself, this is an act of insanity in the name of restoring sanity. But it showed again something very profound. That as we are hyper-connected, we are also longing to connect with each other as human beings. So my other prediction is that while we are going to be seeing a greater and greater explosion of everything digital, we are also going to be seeing a greater explosion of everything live. People will want to connect in their own communities. That's why we are betting on local, because they will want to connect with each other, to see each other, to look into each other's eyes, at the same time that they're spending hours and hours on Facebook or tweeting or watching videos on YouTube. I think, in fact, the more we do of the former, the more we will want to connect in a human way, in a live way. So in the same way that everything new has been watched with a kind of fear that it will completely replace everything old, this is not really what's happening. The movies did not replace television. And television did not replace radio. We're just connecting with all that in different ways. And that's why I don't see the future as either or. In fact, I don't even see newspapers as dying. I see them as increasingly becoming different and having an active and vibrant online component if they're going to survive. But what is fascinating for me at the journalistic level is how do we learn again to tell stories? How do we go back to the old-fashioned tradition of storytelling? Because so much of our modern media is entirely consumed by data and facts. So I have actually assigned some of our reporters to do nothing else but putting flesh and blood on the stories. So don't tell me that we have 26 million people unemployed or underemployed. Tell me their stories. Tell me what is it really like to graduate from college and not be able to get a job. How do we deal with that? And how do we deal with that as a country? And that's really the kind of journalism that I think is going to enchant and win hearts and minds in the future and in the present, because we are doing it right now, others are doing it right now, and we see the way that our readers engage with that. Yesterday we launched at the Huffington Post Media Group, which includes all AOL content now, a big campaign to support military families. And the response has been amazing. We tracked all the different issues that military families are facing. I cannot take my jacket off because I'm Okay, that's a good idea while it lasted. So we saw this amazing response from people wanting to do something for military families. A woman wrote and said, "Can you connect me with this homeless military vet? I want to offer them a home in Chicago." And really stayed on it until we connected them. And again, in our section called Impact, which is a section we created dedicated to people reading the news and then taking action to help people or causes that they read about, the most significant shift is that news is now actionable. You used to read something or watch something on TV and maybe your heart would be touched and then you'd go and make a cup of tea and forget about it. Now online you can take action right away. And that's why we have these widgets everywhere that encourage people to take action right away and to be able to do something when their hearts are being touched and activated. So because I want to leave as much time as possible for questions and a discussion, which is the best part for me, I would just like to end by saying that if you look at the first 25 years of .com, and we've just had the first 25 years of .com, then it has been like a time of online miracles. I mean, who could have predicted what would have happened in the last 25 years, right? I think we should kind of close our eyes and imagine the world 25 years ago, before YouTube, before Twitter, before Facebook, before the Huffington Post. I mean, that's almost impossible to imagine. But as we look ahead, my crystal ball now sees even more explosive wonder. And the challenge will be to direct that combustible energy and that combustible creativity to solving our needs for more truth, more transparency, more wisdom, more enchantment, and more, much more digital advertising. Thank you.
I'm right here.
I think you can hear me like that from this mic, right?
Yep, you can
go.
Okay,
so I can take my jacket
off. So let's pull up the house lights and see if we've got a couple of questions. We've got microphones here, here, and here. You can stay there. You can walk with me. It's up to you. I have a question to start, which is, you've been a little busy lately, and you're talking about solace and sleep, and I imagine your own sleep must have been somewhat impacted by the acquisition. So you're talking about all of these things you need to do to protect yourself. Tell us about your day. What are the islands that allow you to do the thinking that you're saying are so important for all of us, and yet at this extraordinarily busy time, I can't imagine that your islands might have been eroded a little bit. So what is your day like?
So, in terms of my practical things that I do every day, I meditate every day. I try and meditate before I start my day. I have what I call my joy triggers. Now, joy triggers are irrational. My joy triggers may not be your joy triggers. Don't worry about that. Like, my joy triggers involve pictures of my children who are now in college. They're 21 and 19. But I have pictures of them when they were babies and much less problematic. And I have them everywhere. And they're a complete joy trigger. Then I have another joy trigger is a Starbucks cappuccino with one shot of espresso only and a green straw. When I look that, somehow it's a complete joy trigger for me. The other thing is I always have a song on my iPod that is the song of the moment. The moment may last 2 days, 2 weeks. I play it non-stop. I don't listen to anything else. It's the joy trigger. At the moment, it's very embarrassing, but I'm going to confess it here, right? The song of the moment is Chris Christopherson, The Taker. I'm sorry. It could have been Mozart, The Zauberflöte or something, but it's not.
I thought it was going to be Will I Am.
Yeah. I love Will I Am too, but it's just, there's no reason, there's no rhyme or reason why. But so at any moment during the day, you can tap into your joy trigger, or tap into your killer app, whatever it is for you, meditation, yoga, whatever, and basically course correct. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a pilot, and he said to me that most of the time planes fly off course. Did you know that? He may be worried now, but the only reason there aren't any more plane crashes is because they have such a fantastic course correcting mechanism. So a lot of the time we are off course, we make mistakes constantly. Instead of judging ourselves, we need to have a fantastic course-correcting mechanism. Life is all about correcting your mistakes quickly. We launched a new section of the Huffington Post just before the merger on divorce. And one of the features of the section was something that we called the moment we knew, and it became hugely viral. We had people just who would say, the moment I knew, basically, that this was over, or the moment I knew she was having an affair, or the moment I knew, whatever. It was just incredible. And incidentally, the idea of the divorce section was Nora Ephraim, who's an editor-at-large with us, and she said, we must launch a section on divorce, because she said, marriage comes and goes, but divorce is forever. And that became our tagline. So, basically, humor and joy triggers and something that provides course correcting are my keys to be able to do my life at a more intense level, since the integration has definitely meant just a lot of work, a lot of time spent bringing together two companies. It's worked kind of amazingly, given that normally integrations are really hard. I think part of it has been because our CEO, Tim Armstrong, was determined that we would do it really fast. So when the facilities people said to him, we can move everybody in the same office by the end of May, he said, pretend you're having a party, not an integration of two companies. Pretend your daughter is getting married. You have to do it by the end of March. And we did. And the day that the merger became legal, we also launched a 30-day volunteer effort for all the employees. And every office around the world that completed 100% participation would get Greek cookies and champagne, and Boston was first. So again, as a company, one of the things that has been so amazing for me about this merger is that our goals are so aligned. That what Tim wanted to do for AOL and what I want to do for the Huffington Post in terms of bringing us together and actually living all the things we're talking about, living our commitment to doing something good while at the same time doing well for the bottom line and for the company need to permeate everything. And that's why we brought B. Stone as our strategic advisor for social impact to work with him in identifying all the ways that we as a company can actually practice that and at the same time put the spotlight on what other companies are doing around the world that have to do with corporate responsibility and have to do with doing well by doing good.
We have a question. Tell us who you are.
Hi, Arianna. My name is Christian Grant from Executive Talks. You're not always politically correct, and sometimes you say things that people in Washington or journalists normally don't say. Where do you get all that courage from to say what you really feel?
Well, I remember when I was growing up in Greece and I studying Socrates. My God, I don't normally quote so many dead wise people, but Socrates said that courage is the knowledge of what is not to be feared. Most of the time, we are afraid of our own shadows. Most of the time, we're afraid of things that do not deserve to be afraid of. And I think that's really, for me, the most important thing. I wrote a book called On Becoming Fearless. And that's not really about being fearless in the sense of not being genuinely afraid, but it means not letting our fears get in the way of us doing or saying what we want to do, including taking risks. I mean, those of you working in this digital sphere, take risks all the time because we're kind of reinventing the world all the time, and there are never any guarantees. I remember when we launched the Huffington Post, the overwhelming assumption was that it would be a complete failure. Indeed, Nikki Fink wrote about it on the first day. She called it the movie. I've learned the review by heart. She said the Huffington Post is the movie equivalent of Gigli, Heaven's Gate, and some other dreadful movie, all rolled into one. And then she said this failure is simply unsurvivable. So you have to be willing to not let reviews like that or naysayers get in the way of what you want to do. And as I tell my daughters endlessly, you have to also be willing to fail along the way. I constantly talk to them about my failures. I constantly say to them, for example, my second book was rejected by 36 publishers. At some point, maybe at rejection number 25, I might have said, you know what? This is really the wrong job for me. I should do something else. So that's when you really, if you believe in something, perseverance is, for me, the key between failure and success. And also is the key to not being afraid about what people say about you, or how people perceive you, because that's really the road to inaction.
We have a question over here. Please tell us who you are.
Sure. Hi, Arianna. I'm Mike Boland. I'm an analyst with BIHLC and a writer, and I'm actually one of your bloggers for HuffPost, so thank you for that. So people often ask me along those lines, do you get paid for that? And my answer is no, but, it's exposure to 40 million uniques or, something like that, which is better than a paycheck. So that's usually my answer to that question. I'm wondering what your answer is to some of the criticism that, in not my words, but in the words of the criticizers, you are kind of exploiting some of these voices, and what's your answer to that? And then also, how does that feed into your general strategy in terms of building an editorial product around many different breadth of voices from industry?
Well, actually, I'm so glad you brought that up, because for me, blogging, which has been a very important part of the Huffington Post from day one, and will continue to be. In fact, we are migrating the blogging platform of the Huffington Post on all AOL sites and on all patches. All 800 towns will now have a blogging platform, which I think will increase engagement dramatically, because you'll be able to have anybody from the mayor to the kid that's participating in a high school game be able to blog, to upload pictures, video, whatever. And the commenting platform, which goes along with blogging, and last month alone we had 4 million comments, so we're migrating all that. That is like in its own bucket. That's really what the internet is about. That's what people do all the time, whether it's on Facebook, on their own blogs, on collective blogs, on Yelp, on Google, on any form of social media. People are blogging, and they're blogging because they want more and more people to be exposed to their ideas, their opinions, their books, their movies, either because they're selling something or because they believe in something that they want to share with others. And that's the brave new world. And there are no commitments, like I'm delighted you blogged for us, but if, say, you decided not to blog, nobody would bug you. And there are no deadlines. And then there is the other world of journalism. And we have hundreds of paid, with full benefits, etc., reporters and writers and editors who are, in a way, as Jason Linkins, our media editor, wrote in a piece, providing the architecture and building it, if you want, building the field into which bloggers can come and have it all ready for them. The great technology, the great pre-moderation technology also, which means that when you blog, if somebody wants to attack you and use sort of vile language or ad hominem attacks, we're not going to let the comment through. So there will be also a similar environment in which the conversation can take place. But all that could not happen without all the paid people creating that architecture. So there's two very different worlds. Aggregation is a third bucket. And Tim Armstrong and I had an all-hands meeting at our office in Washington, in Dallas, Washington. I always say Washington also because otherwise people think I'm saying Dallas, Texas, one of the problems with my accent. So, during that meeting, I actually said that even if Tim Armstrong had suddenly said to me, you know what, you have $10 billion to produce original reporting, I would still aggregate. Because I believe that even if I had unlimited amounts of money to produce original reporting, I could not claim that we are the only source of good reporting and good writing. And I would want our readers, and now unduplicated, we have 250 million unique visitors around the world. I would like them to come to us and know that they're going to have access to the best writing, the best news, the best information, the best services around the world, either that we produced or that we curated for you. And that's a great service. And so for me, these are different buckets, and the best media companies of the 21st century are going to excel in all these three areas. And the fourth one being engagement through commenting.
We have time for one more question. Please tell us who you are.
Hi, Arianna. My name is Nick Wisoki. I was actually recently laid off from a tech company here in San Francisco. So I'm available if you have any opportunities. But I digress.
Arianna at HuffingtonPost.com is my email.
Perfect. I'll shoot you an email. I'm actually curious. I'm very interested in your idea that, and I couldn't agree more, that people are very sleep deprived and everybody's so connected. I'm curious what evidence you have, other than the medical researchers saying that it's not a good idea, what evidence you have that this is a trend that's going to begin to reverse itself? Because from what I see with Google and their Droid and Apple and their iPod and their iPads and all this, people are becoming more and more connected and maybe even sleeping less. So what makes you believe that this trend is going to begin to reverse itself? Thanks.
Well, that's a great question to end on, because it really sums up everything that I talked about, which is that whether you're optimistic about the future or pessimistic depends entirely at what part of the split screen you're looking at. Because we're living in such an amazing time of transition, and I know that in a sense everybody always thinks they're living in a time of transition. Apparently Adam turned to Eve and said, darling, we're living in a time of transition. But I think now we're really living in a time of transition. And so if you look at what is dying, you're going to be incredibly depressed about our world. Actually, on the days when I'm focusing on what is dying, either because I'm writing about it or because I'm editing somebody's piece about it, I want to literally crawl in my bed under the covers and not get out of bed. But when you then switch and look at the other part of the split screen, at what is being born, you're just filled with this incredible sense of optimism about what's happening in the world. And whether it's at the political level or at the personal level, whether it's about sleep and learning to lead lives that are not about exhaustion, that are not about the idea that success means driving yourself into the ground and having a heart attack in your 50s, otherwise you can't succeed, then you're seeing a whole other world being born. And I know at the political level, my last book was called Third World America. So that's a pretty depressing title. And the first 199 pages are all about what is dying. They're all about the downward mobility in this country. They're all about the indicators of the American dream dying. So I recommend that you skip this 199 pages and start on page 199, which is about what is working in this country, about the ways that people are coming together using social media to help themselves and help each other. Just one example. In Portland, Oregon, an unemployed man, an unemployed concierge, who had exhausted all possibilities of finding another job after he had filled in hundreds of applications, came to the conclusion that the one thing he had was time. So he started a site called we'vegottime2help.org. And he literally connected people who are unemployed or underemployed with people of need. And it transformed not just the lives of people that they touched, but their own lives. Because suddenly, instead of seeing themselves as victims, they began to see themselves as people who could help others. And that dramatically changes the way you look at yourself. And I have endless examples of what's happening. And the use of social media for that, whether it's Etsy.com, where people just go and create their own jobs. They take their hobbies and turn them into jobs. Or any number of sites. I mean, I've spent so much time on sites like recessionwire.com and howigotlaid.off.com, and you're not depressed at the end of it, because you're like stunned by the explosion of compassion, creativity, and ingenuity that human beings are capable of, and that now the new technologies make it possible for us to connect with each other and to make it easier to get to a tipping point where that part of the split screen begins to take over the other part of the split screen. So maybe it's because I'm Greek and a naturalized American, but I am a congenital optimist. You know, after all, Zorba the Greek is a cultural hero. And America is a congenitally optimistic nation. So I do believe that if we use the incredible miracles of technology to make it even easier to tap into our own humanity, we will be able to transform the world in all the ways that we're all dreaming of. Thank you so much.
What a wonderful way to end. Thank you, Arianna.